his best. Dark and now lost to me. Only trust in the northern star. That's the only point that's fixed. I once believed in love. Even love cannot bridge this rift.
You can advertise your business on Night Dreams Talk Radio, and you will be heard worldwide. Why not contact us at nightdreamstalkradio@gmail.com.
You're listening to my friend Gary Anderson on Night Dreams Talk Radio, the best in paranormal radio.
Now, John, cut that out. You know I'm not the best, but I can honestly say we are on the radio. Tonight, we got Whitney on. We're talking about his new book, A New World. And we're talking about, well, what happened back in the 80s. Now, hey, Whitney, a question I have to ask you. In 1989, you were in your cabin, and this man and a woman, as you mentioned, came in. You had an alarm system, and they bypassed the alarm system. Did you ever go back and figure if it was malfunctioning, or they just had
Certainly. It was. There was a huge magnetic field on the garage doors. After that happened, the morning after that happened, the system was still armed, and I had decided it was some kind of bizarre dream, and these two people had come into the house in the night, and I'd seen them. I mean, they came right into my bedroom, and they had overwhelmed. I tried to go for my gun, of course, but I became immobilized, and they had been pressing on my head for a few seconds, and then they left very noisily with a lot of crashing in the woods and stuff. And in any case, I ran through the house trying to determine if there was a breach anywhere, because the alarm system was still armed, and the house was all locked up. The alarm system was working fine. So I decided that it must be that it was a dream, a nightmare, a super lucid nightmare, because it felt real, seemed real. They looked real, and they were right there. I mean, I saw them coming across the room and heard people talking outside and the crunching of gravel in the driveway and everything. It was just hard to believe it hadn't been a real experience. So, but anyway, I slept uneasily, and then in the morning I went out to get the paper, which involved driving out to a little store about 1.5 miles away. And I opened the door into the garage, and I had not checked the garage in the night. I hadn't thought to. And the garage door was wide open, even though the system was still armed. So what could this be? And I called the alarm man immediately. And he came over, and he used a Gauss meter to detect the magnetic fields to see if there was something wrong with the switch, because it seemed impossible that the door would be wide open and the alarm system would still be armed. And he found that there was a really powerful magnetic field there that was so powerful that even with the door open, the switch was not disconnecting. And there was nothing, you know, magnetic fields aren't like radio. They don't propagate. They have to have something generating them, and they remain in a certain form around the generator and whatever's generating them, if it's a passive magnet or an electromagnet. But there was nothing there that could generate anything close to a magnetic field of that intensity, so he did all he could, which is to changed out the switches, and it worked fine again after that, and we just were less mystified. Then that afternoon, my ear started to hurt, and I felt it, and it had a lump in it that hadn't been there before. that was the beginning of my discovery of the fact that I had an implant put in me.
What did you do when you discovered you had a lump there? Did you go to the doctor and have it checked? And
Yes, I did. Initially, I went to the doctor, and he said it's a little cyst. And my regular doctor said there's nothing, it's not infected or anything, but I'd just leave it alone. And I wasn't willing to tell him what had happened, so I didn't tell him that. But I told Ann that, I'm going to go back and I'm going to get him to take it out. And she said, no, let's figure out what it does first. Let's figure out what this thing is. And because, you're here to learn about this, and it's what you're trying to do. And I said, well, it's not in your head. And she said, no, it's not. And she said that we should leave it. And so I did leave it. I left it for a couple of years, and then we met another doctor in San Antonio. We'd moved down to San Antonio. We met another doctor there, and his reaction was, yeah, I can just pop it out. It's nothing to it. And she said, okay, look, you've had it in there for now, it was about 3 or 4 years, and we couldn't tell it was doing anything except the ear would get hot once in a while and very red. And I had been working at that point with Bill Mallow, the head of materials science at the Southwest Research Institute in San Antonio. We'd been actually working on implants that were being provided by Dr. Roger Lear in L.A., who was taking them out of people at that time. And it was very interesting work, but we weren't finding any smoking guns because they were all nickel iron and, looked like meteoric iron. The only thing about them that was really unusual was that they were encased in epidermis rather than calcium. And the body will encase a foreign object in calcium in order to isolate it from the body. But it doesn't have the genetic encoding to create epidermis in muscle tissue. So we knew they were not accidental inclusions. They were definitely something that had been put in by somebody, but we couldn't tell why. There just seemed to be no reason for it. There was no evidence of any technology in any of them. Anyway, I was talking to him, and mine turned on, and my ear got bright red, and there was a signals acquisition lab at Southwest, and so we went and they turned the lab on, and they picked a signal up from the thing. But the lab's classified, so they couldn't tell me anything about it. 20 years passed. I was at a library thing in San Antonio a few years ago, and a guy walks up to me in a crowd just after I've given a speech, and he says, "Mr. Strieber, I just want to know you to know that I was one of the people working on this in that lab on the signal, and the signal remains one of the most unusual signals that we have ever found." I said, "Well, can I learn more about it now?" He said, "No, unfortunately, it's still classified," and he turned around and walked out, and I never saw him again. But at least I know something about it. That's pretty much the story of the implant, except I learned how to use it starting in 2015.
Oh, wow. But again, too, didn't you have it, try to have it removed, and it moved around when they were trying to take it out?
Yeah, I did. That's right. The doctor I'm sorry, I went over that. The doctor didn't get to that. The doctor in San Antonio, Dr. John Lerma, did try to remove it. He opened it up, and as soon as he touched it with a scalpel, the entire thing moved from the pinna, which is the top of the ear, under the skin, down into my earlobe, a couple of inches. I mean, it moved very dramatically. And, he immediately closed up the incision. He said, "Whitley, I'd have to cut your ear off to get this thing."
Oh, wow.
He was completely mystified, and it's all on videotape. So it's, there's no question about the fact that I'm describing something that happened. And so he did get a little sliver of it, and he sent the sliver to a lab in the normal course of the medical profession, and lab tech called him and said, "Is this a joke?" And he said, "No, it's not. It came out of a patient." And he said, "Because this is a metallic base, and it's got motile cilia on it, proteinaceous cilia on it. This is not something natural. This is a piece of technology of some kind." So we got it back from the lab and took it out to Southwest to Bill to analyze it, and he found that, and he found some calcium. By the time it was out there, the cilia were pretty much gone. They had dissolved, but the little bit of metal and calcium was still there. And the next thing I knew, Bill said, "Well, you can come get it now." And when I went to get it, and he opened his desk drawer, it was gone, and I don't know why. Whether it was given, because they had more than 50% of their budget was provided by the Central Intelligence Agency, and I have no idea. A lot of stuff going on out there was classified, and I have no idea why it was gone, if Bill lost it or what. But I never saw it again. And that was the end of that story for many years. And then in 2015, I began to learn how to use it. I'm glad it's in there now, I'll tell you, because it's a really useful and really extraordinary thing.
Yeah, that is interesting. Have you heard of Timothy Cullen? He was the number 9th implant removal from the late Dr. Roger Lear. And
well, I might have even been there when the implant was removed, but I do not know the name.
Yeah.
Remember the name.
Yeah, well, when they sent it out to the lab, according to Timothy, that the results came back, it was some type of silver with other types of metal that was mixed into it that could not be compounded on Earth. There was no way to put all these type of, different type of metals together.
Yeah, there's a lot of that stuff out there. I've got some in my office, not that particular stuff, but I've got a piece of layered magnesium and bismuth, which I've had for years, that was I acquired some time ago. And the fascinating thing about this is there's nothing causing the magnesium and the bismuth to adhere. They're just together. They're not. There's no bonding agent in there. So why do they adhere? Why is it like that? Because you can't break it apart or anything. And in fact, the researcher Linda Moulton Howe had some, and she recently sold it to this group called the To the Stars Academy for analysis. But nobody asked me for mine, so it's still sitting in my office.
Interesting.
We did study it at Southwest and did some scanning electron microscopy on it, but I've just told you everything we found.
After it was removed, what have you felt different physically, emotionally?
No, mine was not removed.
Okay, no, it wasn't removed.
No, it was just a piece of it, and it went back. Oh, I forgot to tell you, it went back up into pretty much where it is now the next day. And it hurt. It burned my ear when it went up because there was no anesthesia in my ear by then. It had worn off. And it went back up to where it had been in the first place on its own.
Very interesting. How often does it turn on and off? Is it periodically or?
Nowadays, it turns on very occasionally. I can remember, I think I felt it about 6 weeks ago. The last time it definitely turned on, I was rehearsing a speech in front of a member of the family who's also had close encounter experiences, and she saw it. She saw the ear turn bright red, and she said, "Your ear's turning bright red." And I said, "Well, I guess it's not just you and me listening to this rehearsal. I hope whoever's on the other side likes it, or maybe I'm going to be in trouble." So that was that. It turned on then, but I use it. I discovered in October, I think, September, October of 2015, that there's something very unusual in my head. I was in the John, and there was a bright sun shining on the white wall in front of me, and I noticed movement